in the University of Edinburgh. If there's any weird sound, it's because we're sat in the same room next to each other, so apologies for that. I'm Sustainability Implementation Manager here at Edinburgh. I think today we're going to have the first half of the meeting, Sean's presentation, and I think Jenny's very kindly provided some discussion points after that. I think there's about 4 of them, so roughly, I guess we've got 25 minutes for that discussion, so roughly 5 or so minutes for each section, and then any other questions that you have about Sean's presentation. But I'll now hand over to Sean to introduce himself and do the presentation.
Fantastic, thank you for that, Susie. So yeah, my name's Sean. I work along Susie at the Department of Social Responsibility and Sustainability at Edinburgh. My job title's on the slide there, but my role really is to support procurement to embed sustainability across everything that they do, and we call it responsible procurement up here at Edinburgh. And I'll talk to you today about sort of a bit of background to the University of Edinburgh in terms of responsible procurement, and I'm really going to focus on the piece of work that I've been helping with a wider responsible procurement group across the UK that's developed a lab equipment sharing guidance document. So I'll talk to you about those, and there's time for questions at the end as well, but feel free to put them in the chat. I won't see them until the end. So if you can't hear me or my slides go funny or anything like that, just put your hands up or unmute and I'll try and answer those questions there. I'll get it sorted for you. So let's carry on. So I'll whiz through these bits. This is a bit about the university. I start with this slide to give those that don't know anything about procurement a sense of scale for us as a university, but us as a sector as well. So we're a very big university, I would say, in the context of the UK. But we also have and because that we have a significant number of suppliers. So we have over probably 10,000 individual suppliers within our supply chain. And we spend, well, in the last full financial year, over 400 million just on sort of procurement and related activities. So it's a quite a big piece of the puzzle, really, when we're talking about sort of emissions and that side of things. And we see that really in this graph here. So this is our breakdown of emissions for the 23-24 year. And you can see in red there, procurement supply chains account for close to 60%. If you add in business travel, because it depends on how you cut the cake, but business travel is a service that you do procure. You could include that as well within your scope 3 as well in the procurement side of things. So it's a very big part of the puzzle. And I suppose I wouldn't be here today talking to you about it, and it wouldn't be part of one of the main areas of the Concordat unless that was the case. How we look at responsible procurement in Edinburgh isn't just on the carbon emissions though. So we really look at the 3 pillars of sustainability. In particular, my role is focused on the environmental aspect of sustainability. But we also look at community benefits, or what other parts of the UK, if you're outside of Scotland, might call social impact, as well as the human rights within the supply chain. So your modern slavery, your fair work first, your sort of living wage and that side of things as well. And this is our definition, which we agreed last year between procurement and SRS. And that's what we work towards now as the sort of the 3 pillars of responsible procurement. That's what we talk to our buying community about as well. That's really important to think about that. As I mentioned, I work on the environmental sustainability part of responsible procurement alongside my colleague Ivona. We also have Aidan and Gemma, who sort of focus more on the community benefit side, the social impact side. And then all being told, across the middle there, you've got your human rights and supply chains, and we don't really have a specialist within Edinburgh on that topic at the minute. So between the 4 of us, we cover it as best we can, is probably how I would describe that. And although that looks like a lot of resource, I would say we probably have about a 1.5 FTE equivalent across the 4 of us when it comes to sort of working hours. So although it's 4 people's brains, it's not necessarily 4 people's worth of hours, which obviously would be better. But I acknowledge that actually, compared to a lot of institutions, that's still a significant amount of resource. But then again, comparing it to the size of the institution, 400 million spend, it's a significant undertaking we're challenged with approaching. And yeah, our role at SRS is really to link in with procurement, but also the external partners, which includes the supply chain and suppliers directly, other organisations such as the buying consortia, in Scotland's APUC, part of the UK UPC network, also the buyers and the end users as well, all the way through. So it's a really mixed bag of who we interact with within this sort of project area. Areas that we've worked on recently. fit into these main categories, I would say. So the main thing we've really worked hard on and has brought fruit really is that relationship building between sustainability and procurement. So we've got a really strong relationship with procurement now, where they will come to us asking for our support on specific projects, high impact projects, and they trust our judgment and our knowledge and expertise in that area. We also have standardized a lot of processes to give them sort of tools and resources that are useful for them, so they don't always have to come to SRS, and also the end users don't always have to sort of involve SRS when they're talking about sustainability and responsible procurement. As I mentioned, we support specific procurements, usually the higher impact ones, and I can talk about a later date about how we define impact, if you like. That can be a question if you do want that detailed. But that might be all the way through, depending on the route to market. It might be developing questions for a tender. It might be feeding into the specification of requirements, all the way to evaluating and setting KPIs, all the way through to contract management as well. So all the way through that process of dealing with a supplier, all the way through. And then, yeah, if you haven't read it, big plug for the university's procurement strategy, which was released agreed end of last year, released early this year, which is well worth a look at in terms of how we've embedded sustainability across the procurement strategy. It has 3 pillars, of which 2 are environmental sustainability, and the third is community and social impact. So it's really, I can put a link in the chat afterwards. It's publicly available to see that as well. The area that I'm going to be looking at today, though, really is this sort of thought leadership across the sector. And this is the piece of work that I've been working on with, in fact, if I go to the next couple of slides from here. So EAUC, you'll know already, HEPA being the procurement equivalent, if you like, within the higher education sector. They came together to create a group called the Responsible Procurement Group, the RPG. And this has several subgroups, which you can see underneath there. The 2 on the far right, supplier assurance and social impact, are in slightly different colour because they are sort of task and finish groups, so they have now finished, but they were live last year and the year before. And you'll see me, second group along there, co-chairing it with Joe, who's currently on maternity leave as of about today, I think. And we co-chair the circular economy and waste subgroup. And the idea behind these groups is they have specific focus areas, and they bring in expertise from procurement as well as sustainability on those areas as well. So within the circular economy and waste subgroup, we have members from across HE, procurement and sustainability. I think we're about 60-40 to sustainability at the minute. So it's fairly equal weighting of about 15 to 20 membership. And we decided early on to focus on tangible outputs, and a lot of the other subgroups have done the same, looking at tangible outputs. So the 2 documents that we produced, one on sustainability principles for ICT and digital technology, and the second one is that equipment sharing guidance document, which we're looking at today. We've now moved away from that slightly just from a resourcing perspective, because they were great documents put together, but they did take a lot of resource to develop. We then looked at or we are now looking at specific challenges. So we have a session tomorrow actually that's looking at a project which is looking to resell IS devices, laptops to university community for sort of private use. So staff and students, if they need a laptop at a reduced price rather than it going to landfill. Once we've sort of come to the end of life within the university, it's remanufactured and then sold on to those at a greatly reduced price. We also have one on enhancing framework agreements in July. And this is a plug for the group. So if you have anybody that's interested in these topics, then do let me know. I can put the dates and the topics down as well. So they're open to all. They're not necessarily just open to the membership of the group as it currently stands. But the equipment sharing guidance. So the purpose there, I'll not read it out in detail, but it's to assist in developing policies and procedures that actually have impact at an organizational level, specifically on carbon, because that's the thing that we can measure at the minute, and that's the thing that a lot of institutions are very interested in because of that. But it can look at the wider environmental piece as well. And it talks about the key environmental principles, looking at circular economy, and surprisingly, if you think about the subgroup sort of aim, really, objective. And in particular, obviously focused on reducing impact in the lab setting. But when we talk about equipment, it could be applied to any piece of equipment in a lab setting, outside of a lab setting, within a university setting, or otherwise as well. So it's not necessarily just for lab equipment, but it is focused on that in the language that we use. The key principles that the document talks about is sharing equipment, it's avoiding purchasing new, and maximising the equipment lifespan. So when we're looking at the equipment sharing side, we feel, the group felt that put it together, it's the best way of reducing the impact of the research equipment really is to share what you already have. But that's really a big culture change piece, and it's not going to happen overnight, certainly. Avoiding purchasing new, you can look at alternative purchasing mechanisms like leasing, servitization models, so product as a service, or purchasing ex demo, refurbished models, for example. There's lots of opportunity out there, and it's growing on a sort of daily basis. What equipment is available, and then keeping the equipment in use for long as possible through better maintenance and servicing. And that's an interesting one from a research perspective. One thing we hear back a lot, and again can be part of that discussion, is that research funders don't fund servicing of equipment within their funding. So how can we extend the lifespan when it's not covered through that means? Answers on a postcard, please. I'd love to get the answer there. But then thinking also about the material value at the end of life. So rather than, let's be honest, hoarding equipment and having it in a cupboard just in case we might need it, and 20 years later we realise we still have it and it's now got no value at all, so we try and maybe sell on items or redistribute items to other organisations at a quicker rate, so that maybe it gets used properly for longer and isn't just essentially sort of put aside until it becomes obsolete. In terms of the mechanisms for sharing specifically, there's 4 different levels that we felt, or 4 different groupings, I suppose, which are set out there, and I'll talk about them briefly. I won't go into the details specifically on each of them, but the document itself does this. But the first one is that there's, say, for example, an individual lab which hosts specific equipment that is a one-off for a lot of other people. The lab could set up a local booking system to facilitate the sharing of this equipment, and that will be managed locally by that lab. And we've seen that done through systems like a calendar or even an Excel. It doesn't have to be very fancy in that respect, something that works for that group and that team. Usually it's shared within the team, but sometimes it could be shared externally as well. The second one there about core facilities is using specialized teams within an institution or within an organization whose role includes outsourcing the expertise alongside the equipment to researchers within the institution as well as externally. So you're paying for the expertise, of which the expertise is to use that equipment, so you don't necessarily need to train yourself up for that, which saves a bit of time and resource and costs associated as well. The third one there around institutional-wide equipment databases, usually software-based. I'm sure you could have a paper copy. In fact, I've seen paper copies around, which I sort of cried a little bit out, but there we go. Or somebody even said, "Oh, I've got it all in my head, and that's where it needs to be." I'm like, okay, great. Let's try and download that somewhere, for want of a better term. But it uses dedicated asset management software locally. So it could be at a lab level, could be at school level, or an institution approach as well. And there's loads of software out there. You'll heard of some of them. I will not name drop any just now, but I mean, I could probably name 20 that have a very similar functionality in there. And then the final one of these databases, which are developed at sort of a national level, or at least between the institutions. And there are, again, there's the GISC one, I think, off the top of my head. There's ones that we're supposed to put capital equipment onto as a sort of part of the course when you get a big grant. But actually, I would be very surprised if many institutions, and I'd put our hands up and say Edinburgh are probably not very good. I'm going to put that in inverted commas in case somebody from Edinburgh watches this back and said, no, we did this fantastically well. But I suspect we don't do it very well at Edinburgh, and I suspect a lot of institutions don't utilise those to be able to share more widely what we have available. Now, obviously, there are costs associated with transporting large equipment or any equipment across between institutions, so it might not be feasible to share a lot of the equipment that's registered on these. But if we don't know it exists, then we can't even consider sharing it. So there's the 4 models. And in each of those, it talks about the opportunities, challenges, and gives some examples from across the UK that we were aware of at the time, which show how this could be done. So yeah, lots of good resources there. And then the final part of the document is talks about actions that you can take or that users can take across the 4 different stages you see here. So really, really importantly is that research planning. How do we plan a research project so that we're not having to buy new equipment from the outset? How can we look to say, okay, what equipment's already available within our institution? What can we share? What can we lease? What do we really need to be using in that sense? rather than just saying, well, I want to apply for a new fund for a piece of equipment because that's what's expected of me. And then you go into the procurement stage, which again is that piece of work I talked about earlier about how do we work with procurement to embed good practice if we do need to buy stuff, whether it's buying new or sort of refurbished, whatever that might be. And then asset use, how do we keep it in use for longer? That servicing model, that making sure it's shared and utilised the best it can be. And at the end of life, how can we potentially take it apart into component parts, reuse parts of it? Is there a take-back scheme from suppliers? All that side of things as well. Or can we take it into constituent parts and use those to service other instruments across the university? The document is open access. That's a terrible short link, but if you want to copy that into your email browser, you can do. If you want to take a picture, you can do. I will share it on the chat after this as well. And what I will do though as well is I will actually just quickly show you, because it's quite difficult to see some of those pictures maybe, but I have got it up, so if you could bear with me, I'll do a very, hopefully snazzy screen share switch. Yeah. Go on, it's not going to let me share that, is it? If I put this up instead here. Oh, that's very good. So I should be sharing now. So this is the document itself. I'll just leave it in that format just so it's available. And this sort of gives you examples of what sort of questions to be asked and where you could embed them. So yeah, you're talking about the technical specifications for devices. Could you reuse it? Could it be remanufactured? To try and get people that are making these decisions to think about these questions. And the answer might be no, we can't do any of this. Okay, if that's the case, fair enough. If it doesn't exist, then that's fine. But if you've put the rationale together to say this is or isn't feasible. And then yeah, examples of where to embed it. So that's the document, as I say. I will, I think, stop sharing. I don't think I had any other slides to share except my email address at the end there. So shall we leave it there and you can ask some questions? I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
I don't think there is at the moment, but if anyone has any questions for Sean specifically on the presentation, if you put your hands up, we'll go in that order. If there's no, oh, there we go. We've got Alice. Go ahead, Alice.
Hi, I just wondered whether you had any experience yourself. You mentioned about like the culture change is going to be a big piece in terms of getting researchers to think about this and actually adopt that sort of mindset. Is it something that you've actually got to the stage of like implementing at Edinburgh, or got any top tips you could share or anything with us?
So the short answer is no, but the long answer is that's exactly what we're looking at next. So I've got another slide somewhere in that slide deck. I won't get it up just now because everybody's bored looking at the slides, but it has sort of end users, procurement in the middle, and suppliers on the far end. And that end user piece is really, really important, that buying community. So that's what we're going to be focusing on very heavily in the next year. Because that's where they need to be asking that question to go to procurement, for procurement to facilitate that. So we've got some projects that we're sort of setting up at the minute that are very much looking at that behaviour change, culture change, in particular around research, because we've got some schools that are very keen on this topic that have sort of reached out in the last few weeks, actually. So I think if I come back to you in 6 months, hopefully we'll have some interesting. I won't have the golden answer, unfortunately. I won't have like this is how you do it. It's always the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alice. I think Eliza was next, and also Chris has just popped a link to the ITSS national platform for equipment sharing in the chat if anyone wants to see. But
yeah, no, it's just a comment on the previous question. I think that is going to be a real challenge for people in sustainability to get researchers to change their habits and their mindsets. However, I think that is an area where we can really be glad the Concordat's there. And also things like the Wellcome Trust. So we were audited, University of Dundee, and we were audited last year by the Wellcome Trust, and one of their follow-up questions was they wanted to know what equipment sharing databases we had in place, to pass the audit. So I think that those kind of pressures from funders are going to make a change, because a lot of the time, researchers don't have a lot of time on their hands, but if they know that the money, the source of the money wants to know what you've got in place, then it becomes a lot more important.
So we just need to get the funders to all ask for it. That's what we need. So if everybody can go away, that's the takeaway from today. Go and ask the funders. The other thing actually I would say is, so a piece of work that Ivana is taking a minute with 5 students, I think, is to try and find out what good practices are already going on in the university in terms of circular economy project. So I mean, we know of a few of them. We've got a circular economy training package that we've put together. I didn't mention that, and that's one of the levers that we have for supporting people to understand what circular economy is and what opportunities there are. But we're trying to get case studies to show in a lab environment as well as other parts of the university what is feasible, what's achievable to say, and then looking at it and going, is it scalable? If it's scalable, what does it need to be scaled up across schools or institutions?
Thank you. So I think we've got a question in the chat first before coming to Zoe and then Neil, who's asked, does anyone have any experience with companies that offer to take over used lab equipment? I know someone has replied in the chat, so maybe we'll leave that there for now. Zoe, I think you were next, and then Neil.
Thank you. You mentioned you've got some kind of working groups and you're looking for other people to join. I just wondered if you could share some details about how to join and who you're looking for. Is it any member of staff or is it procurement specific?
So the working groups are those 3 or 4 that I mentioned earlier, and we're looking for people, not necessarily procurement, it's usually procurement or sustainability related. It doesn't have to be. If you've got an interest in circular economy and you're, say, a researcher or a lab, or you know people in your institution that have that interest, then there's opportunities to join in through that channel as well. I suppose the ask of anybody that looks to join those groups is that you are engaged and sort of you don't have to be like an expert on it, but you have to have an interest in that area and have it sort of focused and have some resource put aside to be able to engage with it. And yeah, I shared the link to the responsible procurement group as well on the chat after I've finished chatting as well, because it'll be one of those I need to search for it. But that'll tell you a bit more about the groups and how to get involved as well. Or you can email me for the circular economy one.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Zoe, and I think Neil was next.
Hey Sean, how you doing? On one of your slides, it was obviously the issue, and I know you alluded to it, about the maximising equipment lifespan and the problem that we have with funders and service contracts and actually getting that money. It seems that we haven't got through to them to do that. I was listening to what Elisa said about the Concordat, and obviously these same funders are all part of the Concordat. You know, the Wellcome Trust, British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research Campaign are the same people who don't fund service contracts. And I wonder whether we need to, push them harder as part of the Concordat and try and do it that way, or if there are other routes. I don't know what other routes are available. We always just hit a blank wall when we want to extend the lifespan and get a service contract for 5, 6 years, whatever it is, and the funders are just, nope, we're not doing that.
I suppose I'm not an expert in the Concordat, so I suppose I'll leave that up to the rest of the group, really, if people know how best to approach funders and what mechanisms you have as a collective, I suppose, for raising that. I don't know what that looks like. I mean, we obviously, as an individual, I can raise it in the contact I have with some of the funders through the RPG. So there's members of UKRI who sit on the RPG, the Responsible Procurement Group, and we can raise it there. But in reality, they're not the right people. They're the environmental sustainability people from UKRI rather than the funding people. I assume there'll be different people within UKRI that do those different strands. So yeah, I can raise it with them, but it's not really the right people either.
Anyone have anything they wanted to add to that? Nope. Okay then. I think if there's no more, Siobhan.
Yes, hi, hello. I work here at Queen's University, and we're just actually relaunching our equipment sharing platform. We're just testing it at the minute. It sort of fell to the wayside, I think, with COVID and everything. So But the one question I just wondered is, at sort of what value do you put a value on the level of equipment that you put on your equipment sharing platform, where ours is sort of around £10,000 and above? I just wondered, is that something that other universities have sort of, have a certain policy, or if anybody has any information, that'd be great.
I'm going to suggest Neil maybe goes, because he put his hand up very quickly, so I'm guessing it's not another question. He might have an answer from a university perspective.
No. It's something that we struggled with as well, Siobhan, at Edinburgh, because we had, or certainly with my college in Edinburgh, it's something where it was 10,000, then it moved to 5,000, then it moved down to 1,000, and actually it sort of fluctuated in between. Our finance department have a requirement for us to record equipment that's £10,000 and above for their asset register. It's where we pitch our asset register, and we've not resolved that yet. I hasten to add, we're in the same boat as you. We're sort of trying to find out, we don't want to put things in labs that are, small, couple of £100 things, but by the same token, if we have 200 of them, do we then, do we take them as a collective mass and sort of say, well, this is the amount of money we spend on this? So we've not resolved it either. I don't have an answer. I guess in the end, we'll probably pick an arbitrary number, probably a bit like yourselves, and just go with that. But I don't know what that number is yet.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I think our IT people want us to stick with, and the finance people, with the 10,000 while we get it up and running again, and then maybe go back and look at it, because it does need some work, just getting it all updated again and getting the key contacts and what equipment is out there. And so yeah, I think when they said I can't even remember the figures, but it was tens of thousands of things under £5,000 or something. So it's an awful lot of stuff. Whereas I suppose the 10,000 and above is much smaller and maybe more manageable in the first instance. But yeah, just curious. But thank you for that you haven't it sussed out just yet.
No,
I throw a curveball in there and say, why does it have to be based on finance? Is that because finance is easy for us to get hold of data for? Could it be
Probably.
longer term be based on carbon emissions or environmental impact? Because that's why we're sharing. So actually, you can have a £5,000 piece of equipment, £5,000 piece of equipment that is really environmentally damaging. So that's the ones we really want to extend the life of and share properly. Or you might have a 25,000 piece of equipment, or you might have got a really good deal on it and it just drops below the threshold, and then you don't include it. So but then it has the same carbon impact or so. So maybe environmental sustainability impact might be another way of measuring it. Now, what we don't have is a standardized way of sort of method for those at the minute, but maybe in the longer run, that's a way of looking at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, could well be shown, but I think the issues, and it's probably the same as Siobhan's saying there, is actually who's going to do that. And the money's I'm not saying it's very easy, but it's the easiest thing because those purchase records are there usually, or at least in some respect. That's kind of why it's become the measure. But I absolutely take the point that you could buy something that's extremely cheap but is extremely heavy on power. I mean, ULTs can be like that. High temperature, or low temperature freezers can be, the cheaper you buy them, the more power actually they use. They tend not to be as well insulated, etc., etc. So you do run into problems there. But I think getting the list in the first place is actually the step that's the most difficult. And I think the cost has just become maybe the easiest thing to do. It might not be the best thing to do, but it's become the easiest thing to do, probably.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So I guess following on from that, some of the discussion points we've got is around challenges and opportunities in terms of implementing sustainable procurement practices. I think one of them that you've just identified is the time and the effort required to, particularly in reference to equipment sharing, decide what goes on a list as that. But does anyone have any other challenges? We'll go for challenges. We'll go negative first and then discuss any positives afterwards. So if anyone has got any specific challenges they'd like to raise, for either just to raise them or to see if anyone else has experienced something similar and to see how they've succeeded in overcoming them. Sean's going to just put the discussion points on the screen. Rhiannon.
I'm from the University of Liverpool. I was just interested in relation to like the Concordat and looking at reusing equipment. Has anyone found any either issues or opportunities around the changing ratios in sort of in-kind provision of stuff or access to equipment versus the amount of funding requested? And has that been of help or a negative at all? Just interested in people's feedback.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Does anyone have anything they want to raise in response to that? Well, if anyone thinks of a reply to that, feel free to put that in the chat or put your hand up at some other point in the meeting. Thank you, Rhiannon. So are there any other challenges or questions around implementation? We've got a point in the chat around resource in terms of time from researchers, in terms of non-billable time to research sustainable options. I think that's something that we definitely see as well. Maybe we've started too negatively. Does anyone have any opportunities or positive wins that they've had in implementing sustainable procurement that they'd like to share? Also, no, that's great. So we'll move on to the second. Oh, Elisa.
I was just going to give a shout out to Sean's Edinburgh pathway. I've been trying to implement that in Dundee, and we've got it going and in our just the life sciences department. So you know, we've got a new intervention step every time I've got an open tender or something over 50k. I'm the sustainability officer, so I get sent the tender or the framework, and get asked to help with designing the frameworks now. And so we're building that sustainability into the procurement at every opportunity. But I think it's because I'm here to give people the questions to put in, and then I'll score the questions when it comes back. And it's not particularly difficult once you've chosen the questions because they're specific enough that it's easy then to compare. So in the past, we always had a tell us something sustainable about, you know, your piece of equipment. And then, you know, you would be comparing apples with oranges and you'd have to go away and do loads of research on what on earth the apples from each of them were. And so actually having it doesn't take any extra time having these extra sustainability questions in the first place. And then in the second place, scoring them is actually far, far easier than trying to do it when it's a more generalized question. So, and thanks for that, Sean.
Yeah, so I think that was the flow chart, was it? With the questions, yeah. So I'm happy to share that as a resource, and that's is a document which has questions which you can filter by sort of thematic areas. So say you have something that you think is going to be high biodiversity impact, you can filter it out and it gives you questions related to biodiversity, which you could then ask in a tender if you wanted to, if you had the opportunity. And as I said, it's like having evaluated several different procurement exercises now, it's easier to score the ones that you write because I've had somewhere somebody else has written it and it's as a sustainability expert, you just go, that's just not like, that doesn't make any sense in this context. So it's about making sure the questions are right and then you can evaluate them and getting buy-in from the end users to evaluate those as well, because they're the experts in that field, means that they've got maybe more ownership of it as well in the longer term. But yeah, I'll share that tool for sure.
Thanks both. I think Chris was next.
Thank you. Yeah, Christopher Wilkinson, Equipment Sharing Platform Manager at the University of Cambridge. This was really more of an observation more than anything, and it's about semantics to a certain extent. What I'm now doing in the guidance that I give out to our PIs is just kind of give a definition of what sustainability actually could relate to. So, I mean, I think there's a possibility that the majority of this discussion is really focused on the sustainability of equipment. What we're finding in grant applications is we're also looking at the sustainability of the human resource required while that equipment is in operation. So this then aligns with the Technicians Charter and how we're improving people's work experience and skill set that they have while they're working for us. So we're trying to kind of come at this from, you know, two angles, if you like, the sustainability of the equipment, but also the human resource that's required to operate that equipment. So I think, yeah, just hopefully it's worth mentioning.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything that they want to add to that discussion, or do we want to move on to specific practices that anyone's organisation or themselves have implemented? No. So I think we've slightly already touched on this with some of the questions around engaging with funders. But does anyone have any views on how the sector as a whole can collectively push for sustainability commitments from suppliers specifically? Neil.
Sorry, I actually pressed that by accident, but yeah, I mean, I think obviously I work at Edinburgh, so I know that I know the practices because Sean's basically outlined them to everybody. I think it's by far and away becoming more and more. It's become easier, shall we say, to get information from suppliers. I think there is a push from universities and colleges upwards, and I think suppliers are reacting to that. I think they're more engaged now, and I think that is something that's useful. I know you kind of get that sort of very generic, oh, you know, it's made of recycled metal or something like that, and you get a lot of that. But actually, there are some specifics you get. You can tie it into comparisons between certain types of equipment if that's where your research grant money is, you know, funded from. And I think it's interesting that actually probably in the last couple of years it's moved on quite a lot. And I think the more the organisation pushes, the better the outward practices of companies and maybe just the awareness of research grant bodies becomes, you know. So I think everything that we do at Edinburgh does make a difference. It does push, and I'm sure every single person here, their organisation does the same thing. So it's maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but I think there's definitely a sort of gradual wearing away and sort of moving forward all the time.
Thanks, Neil. Elisa.
Yeah, I think probably just agree with everything Neil said there, but I'd already raised my hand, so I was committed.
I appreciate it.
But I think the other sort of change that I found is that and probably over the last couple of years is that so I was a scientist before I was a sustainability officer, and I already had a relationship with a lot of the reps who visited the building. Those reps ask me all the time, what do you want? What do you need? What are you looking for? Because obviously they're all fighting for the limited pool of money that we've got to spend. And once they've sort of sussed out that our society, you know, that we're interested in, you know, because our scope 3 is their scope 1 and 2, then they start fighting for, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that. And yeah, so I think there is a big engagement to be had through the reps. We have trade fairs here in Dundee. I don't know if that happens in other places, but what I've started doing is that if we have a trade fair, I'll have a session where I invite a few reps to come and tell us about their most sustainable products. And they're really, really happy to do that because obviously they can sell us stuff. But it also like just raises awareness that we care about this, it's important to us, and it's important, it's part of our goals. And so I think that conversation is a lot more common now.
So we've got like supplier fairs coming up. So we had one in Bio Quarter where we attended with Neil as well, and we've got another one coming up in the Central Campus in June, I think. And as part of that, we're now looking at maybe we have a session very similar to what you outlined there, Eliza, about I don't think we'll ask suppliers. So that the challenge with inviting suppliers is you sort of have to invite all of them to make it fair. And they will then come with their most sustainable items. How are you deter, like how like there's a lot of, I wouldn't say greenwashing, but there's a lot of dubious comments made on certain products. So what we're probably going to do is switch it around and try and find end users that have used sustainable products and get them to talk about it, because they'll give a more unbiased, I hope, approach or comment on it. So, and that, I hope, from a researchers to researcher perspective, I think that'll probably have more sway as well, rather than suppliers coming in and trying to give like a soft or hard sell on products that actually may not be sustainable. To have it the other way around. So yeah, definitely agree. Is talking to suppliers, see what's available. You talked about talking to the reps there. I would even go one step further and start trying to talk to their sustainability leads, because again, the reps are the salespeople, and they don't actually, a lot of the time, they're not expected to know all this information. So if you can talk to the sustainability people, and a lot of these companies will have them, you get a lot better information from them. So pushing either directly or through your contract managers, if you have those, for certain contracts or certain suppliers, to say, actually, can we have a sustainability meeting or sit down meeting with them once a year to see what they're doing, what's available, what's coming up, and sort of what innovation is available that we might want to consider. 100% agree with all of that. And supplier fairs are definitely a really good way to open those conversations up with suppliers you maybe haven't engaged with previously, as well. And if you can get a stall there and have that as a way, so that's what we do. I go there as a responsible procurement person, and people come to hopefully talk to me about procuring things. Usually it ends up being like, why can I not buy this thing at the university? I'm like, I'm not procurement. I don't know why you can't buy that thing. But at least it opens up the question, and they go away knowing a little bit more about what we do, and what responsible procurement actually is. Neil has something. I was going to say one thing about what I think to answer that question. Sorry, before you come in, Neil, if that's all right. Is we need to make, how do we change the culture of researchers and the research culture to make them more open to trying things, I think is how I would put it. Because there's the risk that if you change a piece of equipment or even a consumable of any form, that it might change the output of a project or a piece of research. So how do we help overcome that? That's the challenge I see coming up when we talk to researchers. They sort of say, well, I've used this for 20 years and I know it works, so why would I change? It's like, that's a fair comment. You know it works, and it knows you does the thing you need it to. So how do we get them to change? That's the challenge I'm sort of seeing in my head now. Sorry, Neil.
No, I was going to back up what Elisa said, and I think probably we come from similar backgrounds in that we were both lab people before we were sustainability people, if you like, and still have a foot in both camps. And I think that can be useful. I mean, one of the things is that if you go to labs and speak to people in labs, as any sort of sustainability coordinator or any role that you have within it, you do get the questions like you're saying, why are we doing this? We don't have time to do this. You know, who's going to do this for us? And I think part of what I've found myself doing is actually the advice you gave there is sort of emailing companies and saying, look, you know, who is your sustainability rep? Who's this person? Who's that person? Can we find out? And I mean, I get inundated with emails now from companies about sustainability, but there are bits and pieces of information that are useful. And I had one the other day from Eppendorf about using centrifuges and the power of different centrifuges and things like that. Now, obviously, they're doing it from Eppendorf's point of view, but there is valuable information in there that you can tease out and use, you know, to make decisions about other pieces of equipment. And I think that's useful. But I do also feel that someone as a researcher in a lab or a PI or someone who's in charge of a small research group is not going to spend time doing that. And it's that sort of, if you like, my role or probably Elisa's roles that probably need that bit of information to try and be able to translate that so we can tell you guys and also go back to the labs and say, look, this is something you could do. I'm standing up for sustainability coordinators.
Thanks, Neil. Zoe.
Hi, yeah. So here in the University of Birmingham, our business school have been talking to our procurement team, and there is a real interest in looking at our the suppliers, contractors on our framework, and almost kind of differentiating our greener, more sustainable suppliers, or differentiating kind of those greener, more sustainable products. So not necessarily removing anything from supplier frameworks. I don't think we're ready, and it's probably not appropriate, but just being able to signpost our colleagues a little bit more to inform their procurement choices. Has anybody else done that? Because whilst that sounds like a great idea, I imagine this is going to be quite a difficult piece of work to do. Has anybody else done that? Has anyone got any tips or anything to share? That sounds like a no.
So we haven't done it at Edinburgh either, but it's something that we're looking at. So we, I don't know if I'm allowed to share this or not, but we have a dynamic purchasing system for lab consumables at the minute, and we're likely to change that this year. It's coming up to the end of the contract. So obviously there's talk about what that looks like in the future. And I'm trying to push to get even sort of suppliers alongside a pricing schedule to give us a carbon schedule as well against those items. So then at least we can, because as you say, it's all about informed decision. It's all like giving them the information and letting people decide for themselves. I'm not going to cut out 50% of products just because they're low carbon just yet, maybe in 2 years' time. But it's about how do we get the data, and also how do you then compare? Just like I think somebody mentioned earlier, sort of apples to pears, one supplier to another supplier. They might have a slightly different methodology, which means their products look slightly worse in a carbon sense, but maybe it's because they actually report better. So it's a difficult one to be able to put that in. I've not heard of anybody that's put that into their procurement systems yet. But I do think more and more suppliers are able to give us some data. Having said that, I did go out to some couple of suppliers for some data a few weeks ago, and they just went, "Yeah, we don't do that for smaller pieces." So this is the consumables now. I think if you're talking of like bigger lab equipment or the bigger pieces of equipment, I think they will have that now, especially when it's IT related or has IT compartment bits to it. But yeah, certainly smaller consumables, it's not really a thing just now. Some suppliers are starting to use the ACT label on some of their products, and that has ratings on it, so you could use that. The concern I have with some of this, so not labs related, but a large multi-national company that does very good same day or next day delivery services, has a green leaf attached to their products, which when you look at it has about 40 or 50 different accreditations, which if you have one of those accreditations, then you get a green leaf. And one of those accreditations is that they themselves have removed the packaging so that you don't, as a consumer, get the packaging. Now, that to me doesn't mean that it's a green leaf. That just means that they're taking the packaging. So do you mean it's very difficult to say, well, actually it has to, so when you're looking at that, it's about saying what standards do we accept as a minimum to allow the green leaf, or whatever it might be. And at the minute, I don't know of any suppliers that have that level of data that we could be sure that we would be happy with it. But again, until we start asking, then we don't know.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe and Sean. Eliza.
Sorry, I think I'm being a bit gobby here, but I think so. I think now they're called SLS, and they're named Scientific Laboratory Supplies. Yep. So they're coming up with these green leaves as well as the green leaves for the ACT label. Yeah, according to them, and there is a lot of greenwashing probably involved. They're doing a lot of research to make sure that it's, fair. The other issue that you fall into here, though, and like if somebody mentions Eppendorf, then Eppendorf have got these brilliant bio-based plastics, which they end up being, it's the same polymer at the end as your normal fossil fuel based plastics, but the starting material is waste oil, and that's fantastic. So the like the carbon attached to that at the end is going to be way lower than something using virgin fossil fuels, and that's it's got a high well to tank associated factor, but then it's still expensive. It costs twice as much. So first of all, we're not getting the buy-in from consumers here, is the first thing. And the second thing is, if we were just going to add up using the normal sort of the factors at the end of the day associated with how much we spent on lab consumables to work out our scope 3 emissions, people would have a fit if they suddenly doubled, but it's because it's spend based. So, you know, that's another thing that is a big challenge that we need to figure out as well. Sorry.
No, you're 100% right. At the minute that we don't have a good way of attributing the actual, like, yeah, the costs or the benefits in carbon terms of more sustainable options. And that's sort of, if you think about the equipment sharing piece, the most sustainable thing you can do is not to buy. So ideally, we should be moving away as a society, as a sector, to not buying things. Now that's going to come with a significant, relative, like a short-term cost versus a long-term saving, and that's especially in the current financial situation across FHE is going to be challenging. If you're saying, well, actually, we need to spend more to buy glassware, for example, rather than plasticware, people are going to go, well, I'm not sure about that, and then all the additional costs. But actually, if you equate it if you keep those items in use for 10 years, actually there will be savings, cost savings, carbon savings, wider environmental savings, as well as human rights. And that's a really difficult question to raise, or situation to raise, especially again if you're going to funds and saying I need to buy as part of my grant all this glassware for a 3-year project, even though it's going to take 5 years to pay back in theory. I'm making those figures up, by the way, but it's a very difficult conversation to have in that sense as well. And I don't know, as a non-researcher, whether that might hinder your application if you were to put in an application that was asking for more money because you were asking for, in that instance, glassware or a more sustainable option that was truly sustainable.
Thank you. Sorry, just double checking. We didn't want to respond to that. We've got a few minutes left before I'm going to hand back to Jenny to round us off for today. So I'll hand over to Neil for a final few words.
Oh, geez, I've become as goby as Elisa. It's just to say on that point, actually, there very quickly, maybe the savings from the University of Edinburgh on not buying new equipment could be diverted to buying service contracts, which would give people more comfort and more possibly feel more secure about sharing equipment. It's something we're not good at, and we just tend to buy rather than maybe take a step backwards and say, right, okay, well, we won't buy one of these, or if we do have to buy some, we'll buy the extended contract and everyone needs to share it and look at it from that angle instead. Just a thought.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for your questions. I think that Jenny had asked me to hand back to her at 5:02, so I will do that. And thank you, Sean, for your presentation.
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you again, Susie, for chairing, and also Sean for your presentation. It's exactly why we held this community of practice meeting, to exactly share stories, share the challenges, but also the opportunities across the sector. Across the sector, especially in the research innovation sector. So just before we close off, I'm just going to quickly plug the EAUC conference. We do have a session for engaging research managers, and this came from the interest of the Communities of Practice group. So we do have that session at the conference, which is on the 24th and the 25th of June. And then we are also planning to set up another Concordat Communities of Practice meeting. So this was based on the next priority area that that organisation wanted more support on. So this would be based on the environmental impact and reporting priority area, and then we will have a speaker from the University of Exeter. So this would be sometime in October. So once we have those events in place, we will share that with the rest of the group. So yeah, just a big thank you everyone for contributing again. And if there's no questions, then we can leave this meeting for today. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Katie.